Mom dies mysteriously, son gets $750,000, best friend gets nothing. It was a sweltering August afternoon in Detroit, 1998. The sound of running water echoed through a quiet house on the east side. A mother's voice should have answered her son's calls. But silence filled the air like a warning nobody understood. What 17-year-old Marcus Williams found behind that bathroom door would shatter everything he thought he knew about family, love, and betrayal. And as investigators peeled back the layers of deception, they uncovered a love triangle so twisted it would make your blood run cold. This is the story of Dorothy Williams, loving mother, devoted grandmother, and a woman who never saw the deadly competition brewing between the two most important people in her life. But before we dive into this chilling case, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been caught in the middle of someone else's love triangle? Or maybe you've watched two people you cared about destroy each other over jealousy and obsession. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you witnessed love turn dangerous. Your stories help us understand how passion can become poison. In 1998, if you walked through the Corktown neighborhood of Detroit, you might have noticed an unusual friendship. 22-year-old Darnell Williams and his best friend since childhood, Marcus Thompson, same age, same dreams, but very different paths. Darnell seemed to have it all figured out. He drove a pristine 1997 Cadillac DeVille, wore the finest clothes, and his girlfriend Keisha Washington was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Keisha was making waves in the modeling world. She'd appeared in music videos for local R&B artists and had her photos featured in Right On and Word Up magazines. Her natural beauty and fierce ambition were opening doors that most girls from the neighborhood could only dream of walking through. The couple lived in a stylish apartment in the newly renovated Riverfront district, complete with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Detroit River. But here's where the story gets complicated. Marcus Thompson had been in love with Keisha Washington since high school. They'd dated briefly senior year, but when Keisha's modeling career began taking off, she'd chosen Darnell, the flashy one with big dreams and bigger promises. Marcus had accepted this with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned early that life wasn't fair. He'd thrown himself into college, working toward his engineering degree while maintaining his friendship with both Darnell and Keisha. What made this triangle particularly dangerous was that all three genuinely cared about each other. This wasn't a case of bitter enemies or scheming strangers. These were people who'd grown up together, shared secrets, supported each other's dreams. And at the center of it all was Dorothy Williams, Darnell's mother, who'd become like a second mother to Marcus after his own parents died in a car accident when he was 16. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Darnell had dropped out of Wayne State University in his sophomore year. Not for financial reasons. His mother, Dorothy, had saved every penny from her job as a Detroit public schools administrator to pay his tuition. No, Darnell left because he'd found something more intoxicating than education, easy money, and the thrill of competition. He'd started small, buying and selling beepers and cell phones. But when Keisha's modeling career began taking off, Darnell saw an opportunity. He became her manager, booking her gigs, negotiating contracts, and handling her finances. The problem? Darnell was skimming money from every deal, using her earnings to maintain their lavish lifestyle while telling her they were building wealth for tomorrow. What Darnell didn't know was that Keisha had been confiding in Marcus about her growing suspicions. She'd started noticing discrepancies in her contracts, missing payments, and unexplained expenses. And Marcus? He was falling deeper in love with her every day, watching her struggle with doubts about the man she'd chosen over him. Dorothy Williams had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband left in 1989. At 53, she was a pillar of strength in her community. But more than that, she was the kind of woman who paid attention to details, who noticed when something wasn't right. She'd worked double shifts for years to put her children through school. Her oldest son, Jerome, was serving in the Army. Her daughter, Tanya, was completing her nursing degree at Spelman College. Her youngest, Marcus Williams, was a senior at Cass Technical High School with dreams of becoming an engineer. And then there was Darnell, her second-born son, who'd become the source of her greatest worry. But Dorothy had another concern that nobody knew about. She'd been watching the dynamic between Darnell, Keisha, and Marcus Thompson for months. As someone who'd lived through her own complicated love triangle years ago, she recognized the signs. In her journal, a habit she'd kept since her divorce, Dorothy wrote extensively about what she observed.
If you're enjoying this story, Kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Keisha looks at Marcus the way I used to look at James before I married their father. And Marcus, that boy is carrying a torch so bright could burn down the whole neighborhood. Darnell's so busy chasing money and status, he can't see what's right in front of him. But Dorothy's maternal instincts had picked up on something even more dangerous. She'd started noticing that Marcus was spending more and more time at their house, often when Darnell wasn't there. She'd catch him and Keisha in conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. The three of them had been friends since childhood, but Dorothy recognized the signs of a love triangle reaching its breaking point. What she didn't realize was that her own observations were about to make her a target. In July 1998, just weeks before her death, Dorothy made a decision that would seal her fate. She decided to have a conversation with all three of them together. She invited Darnell, Keisha, and Marcus to Sunday dinner, planning to address the elephant in the room before someone got hurt. But the conversation didn't go as planned. During dessert, Dorothy gently suggested that maybe it was time for everyone to be honest about their feelings. She'd seen how Keisha looked at Marcus, how Marcus looked at Keisha, and how Darnell seemed oblivious to both. Sometimes, she said, the heart wants what it wants, and fighting it only makes people do things they regret. The reaction was explosive. Darnell accused his mother of trying to break up his relationship. Keisha fled the house in tears. And Marcus stayed behind to help Dorothy clean up, just like he always did. That's when Dorothy made her second fatal mistake. She confided in Marcus about her growing concerns regarding Darnell's financial behavior and his treatment of Keisha. That boy is heading down a dark path, she told Marcus, and I'm afraid he's going to take Keisha down with him. What Dorothy didn't know was that Marcus Thompson had been planning something for months, something that would solve all their problems at once. Here's where this case takes a turn that nobody saw coming, not even the investigators who would spend months piecing together the truth. Marcus Thompson wasn't just in love with Keisha Washington. He was obsessed with her. And in his mind, there was only one thing standing between them and happiness: Darnell Williams. But Marcus was too smart to simply eliminate his competition. He'd watched enough crime shows to know that the boyfriend was always the first suspect. Instead, he devised a plan that was both brilliant and diabolical. He would frame Darnell for murdering his own mother. Marcus had been studying Dorothy's routines for months. He knew she did her grocery shopping every Saturday morning. He knew she always came home around noon to prepare lunch for Marcus Williams, her youngest son, who worked at the local grocery store. What made Marcus's plan particularly insidious was his relationship with the family. As the adopted son, who'd lost his own parents, he had keys to the house. He knew Dorothy's schedule better than anyone except her own children. The insurance policies were Marcus's idea. Over several weeks, he gradually convinced Dorothy that she needed more life insurance coverage. He even offered to help her with the paperwork, claiming his business courses at Wayne State had taught him about financial planning. But here's the twist that makes this case so chilling. Marcus didn't plan to collect the insurance money himself. He planned to let Darnell collect it, then expose him as the killer. In Marcus's twisted logic, Darnell would go to prison for murder, Keisha would finally see her boyfriend's true nature, and Marcus would be there to comfort her through the tragedy. The grieving best friend who'd lost his surrogate mother and helped bring her killer to justice. What Marcus hadn't counted on was how much he'd underestimated both his own capacity for violence and his ability to control the situation once it began. The plan was supposed to be simple: stage Dorothy's death to look like a medical emergency, plant evidence that would eventually point to Darnell's financial motive, then discover that evidence at the right moment. But when Marcus arrived at Dorothy's house on August 15, 1998, Dorothy was waiting for him with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "Marcus, honey," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She'd figured it out. Not the murder plot, she couldn't have imagined that, but the insurance fraud. She'd received a call from one of the insurance companies asking to verify some information, and the dates didn't match what she remembered signing. "Did you help me fill out those insurance forms?" she asked. August 15, 1998. A Saturday that started like any other, but would end with 3 lives destroyed forever. Dorothy had promised to pick up her youngest son Marcus Williams from his summer job at the local grocery store at 2 p.m. She was always punctual, the kind of mother who showed up 15 minutes early rather than risk being late. But at 11:30 a.m., Marcus Thompson arrived at her house for what he thought would be a routine visit to check on the insurance paperwork. Instead, he found Dorothy Williams sitting at her kitchen table with 4 insurance policies spread out in front of her and a look of growing suspicion on her face. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about our conversation last week. About Darnell and Keisha and what I said about people doing things they regret." Marcus felt his heart stop. "What about it, Mrs. Williams?" "I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe the person who's about to do something regrettable isn't who I thought it was." Dorothy had spent the morning making phone calls. She'd contacted the insurance companies, her bank, and even her lawyer. The picture that emerged was clear. Someone had been systematically manipulating her financial affairs, and it wasn't her son Darnell. The handwriting on the insurance applications was too similar to Marcus's college essays, which she'd helped him proofread. The timing of the policies coincided with Marcus's visits to her house. And most damning of all, Marcus had asked too many questions about her weekly routine, her relationship with Darnell, and her concerns about her son's behavior. "You've been planning something," Dorothy said quietly, "and I think I know what it is." That's when Marcus Thompson realized that his perfect plan had a fatal flaw. He'd underestimated the woman who'd raised 4 children and survived a bitter divorce. Dorothy Williams was nobody's fool. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. According to Marcus's later confession, Dorothy confronted him directly. "You're in love with Keisha, aren't you? And you think if something happens to me, you can frame Darnell for it." Marcus tried to deny it, but Dorothy's next words stopped him cold. "Baby, I know you lost your parents, and I know you're hurting. But this isn't the way. Keisha's got to make her own choices, and you can't force love by destroying the competition." For a moment, Marcus later said, he almost walked away. Dorothy's kindness, her understanding, her willingness to forgive him even as she saw through his plan, it almost saved her life. But then, she said the words that sealed her fate. "I'm going to have to call the police, Marcus. And I'm going to have to tell Keisha and Darnell what you've been planning." That's when Marcus Thompson made the decision that would destroy 4 lives forever. When Dorothy's youngest son Marcus Williams found his mother's body at 3:15 p.m., the scene looked exactly like Marcus Thompson had planned, a tragic medical emergency in the shower. But Detective Raymond Jackson, a 20-year veteran of Detroit homicide, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The victim was wearing jewelry she never wore in the shower. The bathroom was staged too perfectly, and the timeline didn't make sense. The initial investigation focused on Darnell Williams, exactly as Marcus Thompson had planned. The insurance policies, the financial motive, the forged will, everything pointed to the son who'd been struggling with money and had the most to gain from his mother's death. But then Detective Jackson made a discovery that changed everything. Dorothy Williams had been keeping a journal, documenting not just her concerns about Darnell's behavior, but her growing suspicions about Marcus Thompson's obsession with Keisha Washington. The final entry, dated August 14th, just 1 day before her death, was chilling. "I think Marcus is planning something terrible. He's been asking too many questions about Darnell's finances, about my insurance, about my weekly schedule. He's in love with Keisha, and I think he's convinced himself that if Darnell were out of the picture, she'd choose him. Lord help me, I think that boy is dangerous." But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source, Keisha Washington herself. 3 weeks after Dorothy's funeral, Keisha came to Detective Jackson with information that broke the case wide open. She'd been cleaning out her apartment when she found a letter Marcus had written to her but never sent. In the letter, Marcus detailed his plan to free her from Darnell's lies and give her the life she deserved. He wrote about how Dorothy had been the only obstacle to exposing Darnell's true nature and how her death would be the key to their happiness. But the most damning evidence was Marcus's own behavior after the murder. Instead of comforting his grieving best friend, he'd immediately begun a campaign to turn Keisha against Darnell. "He kept telling me that Darnell was hiding something," Keisha told Detective Jackson. "He'd point out inconsistencies in Darnell's story, suggest that maybe Darnell wasn't as devastated as he should be. He was trying to make me suspicious of the man I loved while pretending to be his best friend." The final piece of the puzzle came when investigators tracked Marcus's movements on August 15th. Cell phone records showed he'd been in the area of Dorothy's house from 11:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., exactly when the murder occurred. But Marcus had told police he'd been at home studying for his summer classes. When investigators checked with Wayne State University, they discovered Marcus had dropped out 3 weeks earlier, just like his best friend Darnell. The love triangle that had seemed like a motive for Darnell to kill his mother was actually the motive for Marcus to kill Dorothy and frame Darnell for the crime. On November 15, 1998, Marcus Thompson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. His confession came 3 days later, when faced with overwhelming evidence. But the confession revealed a depth of obsession and manipulation that shocked even experienced investigators. Marcus had been planning Dorothy's murder for over 6 months. He'd studied her routines, manipulated her into signing insurance policies, and even practiced forging her handwriting to create the false, that would implicate Darnell. "I loved her," Marcus said during his confession, referring to Keisha. "I loved her more than Darnell ever could. He was using her, stealing from her, taking her for granted. I could have made her happy." When Detective Jackson asked why he'd killed Dorothy instead of simply exposing Darnell's financial crimes, Marcus's answer was chilling. Because Keisha would have just forgiven him. Women always forgive the guys who treat them badly. But if he was a murderer, if he killed his own mother for money, she'd never forgive that. The trial lasted 6 weeks and revealed the full extent of Marcus's deception. He'd been systematically manipulating all 3 members of the love triangle for months, playing them against each other while positioning himself as the trusted friend and confidant. The prosecution painted a picture of a man so consumed by unrequited love that he'd convinced himself murder was an act of devotion. The defense argued that Marcus had suffered a psychotic break triggered by the loss of his parents and his obsession with Keisha. The jury didn't buy it. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Marcus Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story doesn't end there. The aftermath of Dorothy's murder destroyed the very relationships Marcus had tried to manipulate. Keisha Washington, traumatized by the revelation that someone she trusted had murdered a woman she loved, ended her relationship with Darnell Williams. Not because she blamed him, but because she couldn't separate him from a tragedy that had cost Dorothy her life. "Every time I looked at Darnell," she later said, "I saw his mother's face. I saw the woman who died because someone wanted to tear us apart." Darnell Williams, cleared of all charges but devastated by his mother's death and the loss of his girlfriend, left Detroit and never returned. Today, he lives in Atlanta under a different name, working as a construction supervisor and trying to build a life far from the memories of 1998. Marcus Williams, Dorothy's youngest son, struggled with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that his mother had died because of a love triangle he'd never even known existed. He eventually became a counselor specializing in trauma recovery, dedicating his life to helping others heal from betrayal and loss. And Marcus Thompson, he remains in prison, having been denied parole 4 times. In a letter to the parole board in 2010, he wrote, "I destroyed 4 lives because I couldn't accept that love isn't something you can steal or manipulate or force. I killed a woman who loved me like a son because I was too selfish to let the woman I loved make her own choices. There's no forgiveness for that, and there shouldn't be." Today, more than 25 years later, Dorothy Williams' legacy lives on through the Dorothy Williams Foundation, established by her surviving children to provide counseling services for families affected by domestic violence and obsessive relationships. The case of Dorothy Williams stands as a stark reminder that the most dangerous predators aren't always strangers. Sometimes they're the people who claim to love us most, who know our routines, who've earned our trust, and who believe that their feelings justify any action. Marcus Thompson thought he was the hero of his own love story. In his mind, he was rescuing Keisha from a man who didn't deserve her and punishing Darnell for taking her away from him. He saw Dorothy as an obstacle to his happiness rather than a human being with her own right to life. But love triangles don't create killers, they reveal them. The capacity for murder was already inside Marcus Thompson. The competition for Keisha's affection just gave him a reason to act on it. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a love triangle isn't the one who's being rejected. It's the one who's convinced themselves that they're the victim of an injustice that can only be corrected through violence. Dorothy Williams trusted Marcus Thompson because she saw him as a son. She loved him because that's what love is. And ultimately, that love and trust became the weapons he used to destroy her. But here's what Marcus Thompson didn't count on. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried under layers of deception and manipulation. Dorothy's journal, Keisha's letter, the insurance records, they all told a story that Marcus couldn't control. Justice wasn't just served, it was inevitable. This case raises questions that go beyond just one family's tragedy. How do we recognize when someone's love has become dangerous obsession? What warning signs might we be missing in our own relationships? And how do we protect ourselves from people who see us as obstacles to their happiness rather than human beings deserving of respect? I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were caught in someone else's love triangle? Have you witnessed obsessive behavior that made you uncomfortable? What would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted had been manipulating your relationships? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories help us all recognize the warning signs of dangerous obsession. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every week we're diving deep into cases that prove love can be the most dangerous emotion of all. Remember to like this video if Dorothy's story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to understand the difference between love and obsession. Your engagement helps us bring more untold stories to light. Until next time, trust your instincts. Remember, real love never requires violence to prove itself. And as always, stay curious and stay safe.